There's an expression that is not mine, but I use like a hammer around here, that sustainability is a journey, not a destination. So if you claim to be sustainable, that you have arrived, it's bullshit. You're not sustainable. An acoustic guitar is made up of 5 or 6 species from around the planet, just everything that is entailed. To claim sustainability is a marketing ploy. But if you use it in the sense of a journey, not a destination, that this is part of our efforts to get increasingly sustainable, to improve our sustainability, to address our sustainability. So for me, sustainability is the most grossly overused word in the universe. But it's okay as long as the context is that we're trying to address or improve our sustainability. But hopefully you will never see Taylor guitars claiming to be sustainable or claiming that our products are sustainable, because they're not. I come from the environmental community. I was 14 years at Greenpeace, and I was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, and had a weird nomadic life, and ended up at a guitar company of all places. And it really is a bit like, Camelot, It's not perfect, it's a job. Every job has got their issues, but it is a family. It's basically a family company. We're now employee owned. And by and large, people care. They care about the product we're making. It's a fun product. It's a good environment. We're in Southern California, we're in San Diego.
Could be worse.
It could be worse, for sure.
When a company starts, it's usually started by a founder who's asking themselves, what can I offer to my customers? If I'm a guitar maker, what can I build for these musicians? Later on, let's say that turns into a company. You start adding more people, you add some employees. Oh, we got to work more on the accounting. We add an accountant. We got to work more on this. We got to do. So you start to accumulate and form a company around that central activity. But the purpose was intact. The purpose was, I want to serve these musicians. We like to build great instruments and make it a good value and a fair deal for music makers. We're going to invest in the inevitable.
Yeah.
And when we look at the future, we go, well, I love building guitars out of wood. I want to build a wooden instrument because I know the lifespan ahead of it. I know how ecologically sound it can be. I know how gratifying an instrument like that can be to play and own and hold. And there's something that's just so uniquely human about that experience of building and playing a wooden guitar.
Yeah.
But what I can also see is that the materials we have available are different than the way that they were even 10 years ago, but certainly 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I've worked on a lot of old guitars. I've been building guitars a long time. I've seen changes in the material just in the 30 whatever years that I've been building guitars. One of the big ones is that the pieces of wood aren't as big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the old growth's disappeared,
Yeah.
of course.
I mean, it used to be that the size of a spruce tree would be as wide as my arms.
Yeah.
Right? You go to hug a tree, you're not going to get your arms around it. You go to hug a tree now, you're probably going to get your arms around it.
Yeah.
So kind of independent of each other, Bob and Scott Paul and myself got interested in what we now call urban woods to go, well, yeah, what about all these other trees that are around? I mean, you could think of it this way, fly into a city.
Yep.
When you go to land or take off, you look down out the plane window and you see how green most cities are.
Yeah.
Well, really? It doesn't seem like it matches, but yeah, there's a lot of canopy. There's actual forest canopy there amongst all the buildings. And all those trees are put there for reasons. For shade, cooling value, noise barriers, visual barriers sometimes to control soil erosion, a lot of good reasons. But because they're in a city, when they get too big, they got to come out because it becomes dangerous.
Yep.
Falls over on a building or even worse, a person or whatever. And so we started looking at those going, well, I don't know a bunch of these trees. I don't know these species. I know of them, but I've never worked with them because they're not woods that are common timber woods in some cases. Let's go learn about them. And so we didn't really have a means to go figure out how to do that. We got connected with West Coast arborists and realized, well, they were like kin, because they were already thinking along the same lines, like, well, we just took this tree out. Surely there's something more valuable here than just shredding it for mulch.
Eucalyptus. This is blue gum eucalyptus. We got valley oak over there, redwood, elm, black walnut. You guys like figs?
Yeah.
This is a fig tree. This tree is the widest tree native to Japan, Cinnamomum camphora, and they make Vicks Vapor Rub out of this.
Oh, okay.
So it's pretty incredible. If we get a chunk here. Ooh, take a little whiff of that.
I can smell it over here already.
And the wood, when you cut the wood, out of control. Yeah, that's right. That's good. That's good. So a lot of these grown in Snoop Dogg's area, you know, LBC, you know, Long Beach.
So you can't smell the weed?
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Japan. We got trees from all over the world. Well, thank you guys for joining us here. This is our main conference room at West Coast Arborists. We're a tree trimming company that trims trees and does tree care maintenance for communities who care about trees. And we're rooted in professionalism. So we have been trimming trees since 1972 in Orange County, and we've been growing ever since. Now we work for over 320 different communities throughout the state of California and Arizona. We manage about I said earlier, 11 million trees in the database. So there's about 11 million trees that we have. We like to think of ourselves as a technology company who cares about trees. But this is the national tree of Pakistan. What? What is it doing down here in California? Isn't that cool? It's got an insane smell to it. I mean, you can just smell it. Also, yeah.
That's nice.
And the top of them, or you can always tell a deodar cedar because the top of them are kinked over. They look very whimsical. That's also a holy wood in the Hindu religion.
Okay.
And I guess Deodara means godlike figure. So in like the Himalayas, the priests would live under the deodar trees. But this is one of the most widespread trees in the US. Pretty cool.
The very first time we brought Bob Taylor and Andy Powers and a team from Taylor, I mean, it was kind of the moment of truth. You know, all this kind of work. But if they didn't find tone wood, then we had nothing. Yeah. And they kind of took off in different directions. And it was amazing to me that they both gravitated to the same species as potential tone woods. Like, we knew black acacia that grows here and walnut that grew, that we knew those would work. But no one had used chamois ash before. No one had used ironbark eucalyptus before. And it was really fascinating to see them both just do this shamanic dance, you know? But they ended up at the same place. They both knew this is interesting. This is interesting for back and sides, or this is interesting for some specific part. And here we are, what, 4 years later?
Yeah.
And we're burning through a lot of chamois ash and ironbark eucalyptus, making a lot of like super high quality guitars out of a species that was discarded, you know, 5-6 years ago. So chamois ash, it's funny, Bob and Andy will say, the greatest compliment you can give a tree as a guitar builder is it reminds me of mahogany. And the only greater compliment is it reminds me of old mahogany. And when they were playing with chamois ash, they were like, it reminds me of old mahogany. And it's not just the way it sounds, but it's, you know, how does it work? How does it plane? How does it sand? How does it bend? You know, all the machining in how does it dry? It needs to pass all these tests And then ultimately it's put on the back or side or neck or soundboard of a guitar, and then it's got to work there. But a lot of species maybe would make a good soundboard, but it's horrible to work with, and it's very time consuming. Ebony is a great example. That's why you'll never see ebony except for very small pieces, because it's actually a horrible wood to work with as a woodworker. But in small pieces for a fingerboard or a bridge, or it's brilliant. There's very few species that can accomplish that mechanical function of being, super thin. I was just looking for a super thin piece of wood. Super thin, and then you cut the fret lines, we're gonna insert all the metal frets. And that wood needs to be strong enough to hold that fret in an exacting position. Not a lot of woods can handle that mechanical function. But it's a horrible wood to work with unless you're working with it in tiny little pieces. That's why you don't see ebony flooring or ebony desks or big pieces of ebony, because it's really difficult to work with. Chamois ash, Andy calls it the golden retriever of tone woods, because no matter what you do, it wants to please you. If you bend it, you sand it, you shape it. So this is one of the reasons that this one kind of was the first urban wood that Bob and Andy jumped at.
The chamois ash, what we call urban ash, that is a wood that just wants to make you happy. It's like, this stuff is like a dream. It does everything that you would want a piece of wood to do. It behaves well, it saws well, sands well, glues well, finishes well, can be dried, can be sawn, it's just great, and it sounds really good. It's like mahogany in that I can use it as a top wood or a back wood or a side wood. I've done some necks with it even. It's great wood. That was one that was so similar to the mahogany we were already accustomed to. That was the easiest one to introduce first because it was very similar.
Yeah.
The red ironbark is another one that was a very beguiling wood. That one took me a little bit more head scratching to figure out, because certain characteristics that I expected out of it didn't match the reality. It's a very hard wood, incredibly dense, quite heavy. It's like a cross between some rosewoods and ebony. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's one of the woods that will sink in water.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's heavy and dense.
It originated from Australia originally.
Yeah, it's a eucalyptus species originally, but it's a species that it gets its name from the bark.
Yeah.
So it has this dark, almost black and very rough, almost looks like wrought iron kind of bark on it. And so I was working with that wood going, well, typically when I dry a piece of wood that's this hard or this dense, it'll want to twist in weird ways, it'll crack easily, so you got to manage it in different ways. This stuff behaved better than I expected. I mean, there are literally such a long list of species that just here in California, I mean, a lot of other woods are actually grown and harvested the same way. Like some of the mahogany that we get are literal street trees, but in India.
Oh, wow.
Where they were planted for the same reasons by the British, who loved mahogany.
Yeah.
And they were planted throughout India. Those street trees, when they come down, they get turned into lumber. And so that's some of the mahogany that we get for parts. This goes on all over the place. The more we've learned, the more we realize there's opportunities here.
So cool. And to source it locally as well, that's the best part, I feel.
It's so interesting. I mean, it's very much in keeping with what maybe a violin maker might have done 300 years ago. Yeah. You go, well, I don't have the luxury of going halfway around the world to get this little sliver of wood to build a violin with. I'm going to look over the fence and go, that one's big. Well, I can do something out of that. Yeah. Lucky for them, they had spruce and maple. Those are great choices. Yeah. And so if it was different materials, you could be reasonably assured that the design would have developed in a different direction based on the characteristics of different ingredients. In the same way that, like if you look at the history of cooking, largely the food of a region comes from what grows well there. So they develop a style, a culture of cooking, a set of flavors, go, this is what we have, let's work with this and design things that work with these flavors. So we went up there with chainsaws, and I'm like, well, I don't know what that one is. What is it? What's it taste like? What's it smell like? You know, it's like going, like a chef going to a farmer's market or something going, I have never once seen this. What kind of vegetable is this? What do you do with it? How do you eat it raw? Do you cook it? What do you do with this one? Do you eat the outside? Do you eat the inside? I'm not sure. And so we walked around with a bunch of chainsaws. That one seems interesting. That's this kind of species, looking at the grain structure. I think it's going to do this. I think it's going to be similar to this.
You have a vague idea.
Vague idea. Okay. And so we cut pieces off.
Yeah.
Loaded up the truck with a bunch of chunks of tree. Went, okay, let me go do some cooking. And so it was a number of years where I was just cutting up little pieces and going, how do I dry it? I need a way to prepare it. I got to figure out what it's going to behave like. I got to figure out how it'll work. Now, okay, this one actually is a usable material. What should I do with it? What brings out its best characteristic? What part of the guitar should it function as? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it took years of kind of research, call it, but practically based research to understand what to do with some of these woods.
Right here, we're at the growing grounds, my brother. You know, it's not all about trees cutting down and salvation for the ones. We got to make sure we put more in the ground. So we have a couple different nurseries across the state, and we have planting crews that are based out of this yard, and they load up for tomorrow's plantings, and about 2,000 trees are planted every month out of here. So this is the future urban forest that we're walking through.
How long did the plants stay here before they get planted? It depends.
Yeah, I mean, these are probably 5-year-old trees behind us.
Yeah.
This is probably like a 10-year-old tree, maybe a little older. You know what this one is? No. This is an ancient tree. There's only one species in the genus, so it's one of one. They call it a living fossil. You can find fossils of these things. It's also good for like brain power and herbal medicine and stuff. Ginkgo biloba.
Oh, ginkgo tree.
Ginkgo tree.
It's good tea.
That's right. Ginkgo tea. Doesn't taste that good though. So all this iron bark is all the iron bark that did not meet the cut for good guitar parts. So almost this whole bay is full of iron bark lumber that maybe might have a couple knots in it or, you know, not the right width. So lots of iron bark going to be available, you know, besides guitars too, which is cool.
Yeah.
Used to not, you know, we didn't have this available, but now because we're cutting it for Taylor, there's like a unintended consequence where other people get more wood now. So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, we need a stage to play the guitar on.
That's right. Oh, can you imagine? Ooh. Throwing some tap shoes. That thing would sound good too. So this was all rejected guitar parts. Rejected for, you know, a couple different reasons. Maybe there was a knot, maybe the thickness was off a little bit, but even all the parts that weren't used for guitars are still getting used. Quartz sawn elm, big redwood bench. So this is Tasmanian blackwood. Woo, that's got a good tone right there. We got the beautiful, remember that purple wood we were cutting this morning? How crazy it was? So this is what it looks like when it's dry. That purple's totally gone. But you see the medullary rays exposed here, a little bit of spalting action. Boom, and a little sauce on it, and see what it looks like with a finish. A little silver maple going on here. Ooh, funky, funky. You see what it looks like with a finish on there? Pretty. Ooh la la. Elm, L. This is the Theodore cedar that we were. Take it. Woo! It's nice.
And you know, a lot of the history of urban wood use, it's like the guy who cuts the wood is also the kind of the artist who makes something unique and funky, and I hope you like it. But a lot of people who want wood, they want to build what they want to build. And traditionally that wood has not been available from an urban source. And just look at all these species, and for a guitar builder, like I immediately walk over here. We got the black walnut. The redwood is also interesting, but John will know if it's guitar quality. John knows what Andy Powers wants right now.
Okay, yeah.
And we're looking at the chamelash. We're looking at the ironbark eucalyptus. Black acacia is always nice and tasty. So the whole trick is to take what has traditionally been a waste product.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, it's firewood or maybe mulch. But historically, a lot of this stuff's just got landfilled.
Yeah.
And then especially here in Southern California, because you've got so many people here now, they started telling the arborists who've been in business for 50 years, you can't dump this stuff anymore. You know, the landfills are filling up. It's too expensive to dump it. So almost out of economic necessity, they're like, well, firewood, that was like the first thing. They can get rid of some product and make a little bit of money. And then they're like slab tables. And then we met, and guitars started being a thing. And now the dream is that everything you see is really an example that we hope others come in and build an economy. Because we're not really going to move the needle doing what we're doing. But if people see what we're doing, then we can scale and maybe get more urban trees planted, get more value out of the urban trees when they come down, so they're just not chipped and mulched and burned. And we've only got some, it's pretty primitive right now in terms of the products that are made from urban wood, but the sky's the limit in terms of what could be done. And the other thing, especially in a place like the Netherlands or you know, much of Europe, not just city trees, but kind of reclaimed wood from houses.
Yeah.
You know, like these houses were built hundreds and hundreds of years ago from trees that were hundreds and hundreds of years old when they built them. And if you can salvage some of that wood, it's kind of like being cousins, urban trees and reclaimed wood from old houses.
Yeah.
You know, that we're claiming that wood, we're reusing that wood, we're creating jobs or sequestering carbon.
Yeah.
We really need to make that a reality.
Oh, dang. This is Modesto ash. Funky, funky. Also, the wood's like twice as hard as Shamilson. Not all ashes look the same. Ooh la la. North Indian rosewood. Ooh la 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 la. Oh. This is Himalayan cedar. This is California cedar. This is what they make #2 pencils out of. This is what they make the Pope's casket out of. Funky, funky.